Okay, guys, per your request, I'm going to do this message that is a deep message for those that really want to study, those that really want to take the time to study, take the time to learn. This is not a short video of 10 minutes to just come up with something on YouTube for views and hits. These are those that are willing to take the time to study, to go through deep concepts in the scriptures, and to really understand the whole big prophetic picture of what's going on. This type of work I do all the time, but I don't do videos because the people just don't understand what I'm saying. And that's frustrating when you're a teacher. You want to try to take the information that you know and convey it to someone else so that they understand. If you do that and they don't understand, you feel as though you're not a good conveyor of information. So it's frustrating. So instead of doing this type of content all the time, I don't do it because the people just don't understand. But yet, if it's just a handful of people that understand this, I will say that's a success. Now, one of the things I want to say is that this YouTube channel is a teaching channel on the book of Revelation. In order to understand the book of Revelation, it is communicating a message. It's communicating in various ways and formats. It's communicating through different languages. Okay, and those languages are symbolic languages. They are prophetic languages, prophetic words, prophetic symbolisms through the prophets, prophetic symbolisms through the law, okay, through the apostles. Okay, all those things contribute to a overall big picture message. Now, I encourage you, if you do actually want to take the time to grasp some of these concepts that we're going to talk about, I encourage you to pause the video and read ahead of what we're going to get into. You can read ahead, read Revelation chapter 12. Read the whole chapter, okay? Read Luke chapter 2. Read the whole chapter. It's long, but read the whole chapter, Luke chapter 2, and read Matthew chapter 2. We're going to show you some great mysteries that have stumped the theologians, okay? They're not going to be difficult to understand, but you can understand them. But the challenge you have is you've not followed this YouTube channel, you're not going to be real familiar with the teaching methods that we do, okay? And basically what we do is we take the symbolisms, for example, Revelation chapter 12. In fact, we have another couple other videos on Revelation chapter 12. There's a part 1 and a part 2 that explain it. Now, that chapter has multiple fulfillments. In fact, it has more than 2 fulfillments. In studying Passover this year, I found a third fulfillment of Revelation chapter 12. But what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the first fulfillment of Revelation chapter 12 as it relates to Christ's birth. Okay? Now, if you pause the video and if you go ahead and read ahead, Matthew chapter 2 is, of course, Christ's birth. Luke chapter 2, of course, is Christ's birth. All right? Read Revelation chapter 12 and you'll see the birth of the man-child. Okay, by the woman clothed with the sun. Okay, so I do encourage you to pause the video, go ahead and read those chapters. In addition to those chapters, read Leviticus chapter 12. Okay, so pause the video, read those verses. Now, in this year, in this season, and in the time of first fruits, I really understood and clicked the information I'm going to share with you in this video. I might have to do another part to this, okay? But in this video, what I'm going to show you is what is going on in Christ's birth. Now, we do not promote the concept and idea of birthdays. You will not find any birthdays in the Bible except for Pharaoh and Herod. That's it. Why? It's a pagan concept. It's to get you to worship yourself and to worship your sign in the heavens. That's why you see no birthdays. Now, if the Most High wanted to know the precise day of Christ's birth, he would have told us, but he didn't. And we are no way trying to come up with a precise date of when Christ was born. However, we're going to see the season, and we're going to go through the details of how the season of Passover matches Christ's birth in the things that are transpiring. Not only do they tell us about Christ's birth, they tell us about the whole story of Revelation chapter 12, leading up to when the woman flees into the wilderness. All right? Actually, excuse me, it continues. Now, there's a fulfillment of Michael and the dragon in Revelation chapter 12, and there actually is an aspect of that with Herod, which we will look at. But this is an amazing time, and I encourage you, even as you know, of course, in the Enoch calendar, we've completed this time of Passover. But even still, guys, the Gospel of John, chapters 12 through 20, okay, just deal with Christ's crucifixion. Amazing, okay? So that is, there's a lot that happens there that the Gospels record. A lot. There's a lot to learn every year. It's very, very exciting to do that. And in this video, it may kind of run against our normal kind of Christianese festival cycle we're used to, where we have Christ's birth at Christmas. Okay, of course, he was not born at Christmas. And if you hold to, okay, he was born in tabernacles, that's fine. Okay, he obviously was born during a feast. But what makes more sense is to, you know, understand why, you know, what is the message of why he, you know, came at the time that he did, in the details of what Mary and Joseph did. We're going to go through some of those details, and this is just, all I can say is if you're new to the channel, you're going to have a hard time with some of these concepts. If you follow this channel, you're going to really enjoy this, because we're going to piece together some amazing things. Now, you can see behind me this door, and you can see behind me we have Passover. We've celebrated Passover. We found this wood and it had red painted on it, so we put that on the doorposts of the house. Okay, and now in this message, you can see I'm sharing you. I've also put up a cross, and you can see in the middle there's a cross, and there's a nameplate on it. Okay. Now, we are not ashamed of the cross. Okay. This is what all this means, okay? And so if you're not familiar with the time of the Enoch calendar, stuff like that, that's fine, okay? Have communion. Communion is Passover, okay? So you can see over there we got a bottle of wine. Actually, I'm not sure if that's in the view of this video. Actually, it probably isn't. But anyway, have communion, okay? Have communion. Do that. Now, let's look at this. Because I thought it was really important, because Christ is the door. Okay, so he is the door. On the door you have the Passover lamb. His blood was shed for us. And you can see you put the blood on the doorposts of the house. And it is his cross. He was nailed to the cross. His blood was nailed to the cross. Okay, and you see we have a cross. So his blood was on that cross. And he did that for us. Okay, and so I just put 2 pieces of wood and completed this and formed this cross. And then I realized that prior to me doing that, someone had to put a metal piece there, and they put a nameplate on it. So I want you to see this, because it's probably not clear in the distance where we are. But what it said on the cross, there was a plaque. And then what it says is in 3 languages. It said, in 3 languages, Greek, Hebrew, in Latin. I just put Greek and Hebrew. And this is, in Greek, Iesus. Iesus. And in Hebrew, it's Yehoshua. Yehoshua. Okay? So that's his name. Then it said, I put it in English, King of the Jews. Okay, see that? King of the Jews. Now, what we're going to do in this video, we're going to prove to you Donald Trump is the Antichrist. And we're going to prove to you the precise time of when the dragon was cast out. Okay? But it's important for us to understand, guys, there's people that are coming against his name. They wrote a plaque like this. They wrote the same Greek letters. You know, it's Iesus. Now in Greek, you can see there's two letters and both of them are E's. So this is E-E. Now I don't know all the letters, but I know there's 5 or 6 letters in the Greek which are E. So it is not a bad thing that one of those sounds in Greek is a different sound in English. J. Okay? So there's nothing wrong, guys, with saying Jesus. That's what I'm getting at. There's nothing wrong with that. All those people that want to come against his name, I'm just saying there's nothing wrong with his name. And I'm standing for the cross. I'm standing for the gospel. I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus. Yes, I said Jesus. You can say Yeshua. You can say Yehoshua. But in English, it's a J. Okay, it's not pagan. So get over yourself. Now, during this time as well, I encourage you as well to go through some of the videos where we give you a tour in Jerusalem of the locations of some of the places we believe Christ was interrogated, his process through the cross. So if during this time of year you want to go through the Gospels, read the story, okay, and try to understand it, it's really amazing to see the actual places. Now, basically the things you'll see are not the standard norm in Jerusalem. The people don't recognize the places I'm going to show you. But I'll put a video on the places, the precise places where we believe the events transpired. Guys, Jerusalem is a place in the present day full of lies and traditions of men and deceptions. So we've done our best to do all this research to try to give the people accurate information without feeding into someone's church or, whatever. So we have videos on that. Now, what we're going to do, let's go and take a look at Christ, his birth. Now, as we do, I'm going to tell you right now, there's a great mystery. If you went ahead and you already read Luke chapter 2 and Matthew chapter 2, it's a little bit confusing. I'm going to explain that confusion right from the beginning, so there's no problem. So in Luke chapter 2, guys, it gives us actual point by which Christ was born. He was born, he goes to Jerusalem, and then Mary and Joseph, they go back to Galilee. Now, if you look at Matthew chapter 2, you'll see that they're also in Bethlehem. But in Luke, it says that they went to Passover every year. So, Matthew chapter 2, guys, is not Christ's birth. That's Luke chapter 2. And it says clearly, when the wise men, you know the story of the wise men, well, the wise men had inquired with Herod, and the child was 2 years old. So, Matthew chapter 2 is 2 years after his birth. They're in Bethlehem. Okay? The reason they're Bethlehem is they're also there for Passover. But Christ was born 2 years earlier, as recorded in Luke chapter 2. Now, the reason it's important is because Luke chapter 2 says that they went back to Galilee. In Matthew chapter 2, when they're in Bethlehem, they go to Egypt. Right? Why? Because Herod comes, and Herod is the Antichrist. Okay, Herod is the dragon. Okay? And it's at 2 years after Christ was born. Where's the dragon? And they fled into Egypt. Now there's another false doctrine out there that the 144,000 are the children that Herod killed at the time of Christ's birth. That's a false doctrine. That's not true. Okay, the 144,000 are alive in Revelation chapter 7, and they're sealed. Okay? But it's Revelation chapter 12 is the one thing that we can see in Christ's birth and his crucifixion. And a third fulfillment, of course, in the end of days now. And it's very important for us to understand in this time, which we're going to get into later. So let's get into the notes and the verses. Here are our notes. Actually, these are the notes of a previous message, which I encourage you to watch on the census, the assembly of the firstborn, the redeemed. We can see in Hebrews chapter 12 this census. So obviously we had the other video and we showed you how the beast is doing a census. Okay, United States, you got the 2020 census. So the beast is counting the people. But we can also see a census taking place on Mount Zion, the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. Now, as this census takes place, we can actually see the Lord Jesus Christ doing something similar. In Luke chapter 2, we can see this census. So Luke chapter 2, so how you read the notes, you got Luke chapter 2 here. Over here, we're going to see Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, and the book of Revelation. We're going to compare all these to paint this picture to understand what's going on. But our first comparison of Luke chapter 2 actually compares with Hebrews chapter 12. So in Luke chapter 2, verse 1, it says, "A decree from Caesar Augustus went out to all the world that they should be taxed." Okay, the King James Version uses this word taxed, but in Greek, it's apographo. So grapho is to write. Apo is with. Now this is a unique word because we can see it right here in Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 22 and 23. It says, "Come to Mount Zion, the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, the general assembly, the ecclesia of the firstborn, prototokos, written in heaven." Now, this word that we can see right here in Luke chapter 2, verse 1, apographo, is this word written in heaven. This is not a commonly used word, guys. So there's a writing in heaven. What's the writing in heaven? It's a census. So we see the census in Hebrews chapter 12, okay, verse 23. This ecclesia, in the King James, you see the word church, of the firstborn, prototokos, written in heaven, and the judge of all, and the spirits of just men made perfect. And you can see this Mount Zion. So, in Luke chapter 2, we have this census taking place. Okay? And everyone went to his own city. Joseph went to the city of David, or Mount Zion. Now, this is a bit of a mystery. The expression in the Old Testament for city of David is in Jerusalem. And it is called Mount Zion. So the city of David is now, we know where the temple was, okay? And it's also where Mount Zion is. So you can see there's a kind of mystery here because you have the expression used here in Luke by Luke of the city of David in Bethlehem, okay? But really what this is talking about is not something on the earth, something in the heaven. In the city of David is Mount Zion. Mount Zion is the heavenly Jerusalem. So what's talking about is this decree, this census taking place, okay? And that's what's going on, the census of the ecclesia, of the firstborn, okay? So what Joseph and Mary do is they go to Bethlehem. Okay, and of course we know that Christ is born in Bethlehem. And she brought forth the firstborn. You see what it says? Prototokos. Okay, that's the same word you can see right here. The ecclesia of the firstborn. Prototokos. In Hebrews chapter 12. So what's happening here in Luke chapter 2 is we have Christ's birth, but we also have a future fulfillment in Hebrews chapter 12, as well as the book of Revelation. Okay, so in fact, let's go and look at Revelation chapter 12 and verse 5, and let's look at Daniel chapter 7. Revelation 12 verse 5, and she brought forth the man-child, who is to rule the nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up unto God and to his throne. So, this is telling us what's happening in the spirit realm of when Christ was born. But Luke chapter 2 is showing us physically what Christ is doing. He's going through a process. He's going through a procedure. He's going through a census. Even though he's a single person, he's going through something prophesied in the scripture. So Mary here is a type of the woman clothed with the sun, where she births the man-child, who is to rule the nations with a rod of iron. And the child was caught up to God and to his throne. Now the thing that people have understanding is that there's multiple fulfillments. So yes, this was at Christ's birth. Yes, it's also in the end of days, because he can see he rules with a rod of iron. Okay, but he says, to he who overcomes will rule with a rod of iron. All right, but let's take a look at Daniel chapter 7 when it talks about this same thing. Okay, Daniel 7, verse 13. I saw in night visions, behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven and came to the Ancient of Days. And they brought him near before him, and there was given to him a dominion, a glory, a kingdom, and all the people and the nations and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away. His kingdom, that which shall not be destroyed. Okay, so what is this describing? Okay, number one, this is Christ's birth. In the spirit realm, once he was born, he was birthed as a man-child. He's caught up to God and to his throne. So this is the Son of Man coming to the Ancient of Days, coming to the Father. But we can also see the procedure of what happens physically on the earth in Luke chapter 2. And Luke chapter 2, verse 7, she brought forth her firstborn, prototokos, son, and wrapped him in swaddling clothes and laid him in a manger, because there was no room in the inn. Now, this is obviously a feast time. Now, I've been in Bethlehem, and I've stayed there in the winter, and it's very close to Jerusalem. Of course, Jerusalem is very expensive, so I stay in Bethlehem because it's cheaper. But that's what Joseph and Mary are doing. He's from Bethlehem, so they stay in Bethlehem. And the reason there's no room is because it's very close to Jerusalem during the feast time, and there's no room in the accommodations. Okay? And then you guys know the story, and then you got the shepherds. Okay? And then you got the shepherds declaring everything. And then, as we keep going, now let us go even to Bethlehem to see this thing. And when they came in haste, they found Mary and Joseph lying in a manger, and made known the things that they saw, right? In verse 21, and when 8 days were accomplished for the circumcising of the child, his name was called Jesus, Jesus, which was named because of the angel, okay? Now, notice how there's 8 days. Of course, this is what the scriptures say about after the 8th day you would have the circumcision. But notice what it says here in verse 22. And when the days of her purification, according to the law of Moses, were accomplished, they brought him to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. So what's happening here, as they're presenting him, this is happening, of course, in the physical in Jerusalem. But spiritually what's happening is he's being presented to the Father, which we saw, the Son of Man coming to the Ancient of Days. Now, in verse 23, pay close attention here. As it is written in the law of the Lord, every male that opens the womb shall be called holy to the Lord. Now, this is a quotation of Exodus chapter 13, verse 2. Let's go there. In verse 2, sanctify unto me all the firstborn, whosoever opens the womb. Okay, so this is what it's being quoted, right? Christ is the firstborn. He's not just the firstborn of Mary, he's the firstborn of the resurrection. Now, this is the thing I want you to notice right here. This part, of course, was quoted in Luke, but if we look in the context of what it's talking about, Moses said unto the people, remember this day. Wow. What day? In which you came out from Egypt, out of the house of bondage, by strength of hand of I the Lord, brought you out from this place. There shall be no leaven, be eaten. This day came you out from in the month of Abib. So Abib is Nisan. That's the first month. That's the month of Passover. So it's telling us, remember this day. So it's in this month of Passover, most likely that Christ was born. You see that? Because he's the firstborn. It was quoting that in Luke chapter 2. So this is our first clue that Christ was born during Passover. Of course, it was a feast. There was no room in the inn. But the context of Luke 13 is Passover, the month of Abib, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So 8 days were accomplished for him to be circumcised, right? Then what it says in verse 22, and when the days of her purification were finished. Now, what is that? Okay. Well, first off, actually, let's just rehearse what we just said. We saw the sanctifying, the setting apart of the firstborn. Remember that day. Exodus 13:2. This day you came out in the month of Abib. Okay. Now, as it relates to the days of purification being finished, what we have to do is we have to go and look at Leviticus chapter 12. And in this, it gives the purification time periods of the woman that gives birth to a daughter or to a son. But what it says is the woman that gives birth to a son, she's unclean for 7 days, and then the 8th day is to be circumcised. Okay? Now, you have 7 days, okay? Now, we just saw how the Feast of Unleavened Bread in Exodus 13 is what? 7 days. So, our next clue about the confirmation that Christ was born in the season of Passover is 7 days. So these 7 days, okay, of before he's circumcised relates to the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Then what it says, of course we saw that Exodus 13:6, 7 days you eat unleavened bread. But if we read Leviticus chapter 12 and verse 2 and 3, what it says is, after the 7 days, she's unclean 33 days. Okay? So what you do is you have 7 days. Now the 8th day he's circumcised, but you don't count that because this is the woman, the days of her purification. So in Leviticus 12, read the whole thing. For time's sake, we're not going to do it. But you got 7 days plus 33 days. So 7 plus 33 is 40. Now, what this means is 40 days, because it was the same time period that Christ appeared to the disciples in Acts 3:1. He appeared to his disciples, what? 40 days. Now, we don't know the precise day, guys, that Christ was born. We're not saying that. We're not saying he was born on exactly Passover, the 14th day of the first month. Because you have these 7 days, and then you have these 33 days. These don't correspond, guys. But what's happening is Mary and Joseph, they come to Bethlehem for Passover. But they can't go to the temple yet. There's in Bethlehem. Why are they in Bethlehem? Because they have to wait 40 days. These are the purification period of Mary. Okay, so they're in Bethlehem, they're waiting, they're staying there 40 days. And that relates to the 40 days Christ appeared to his disciples. Now, another confirmation is another census. Okay, now what the 40 days, now Christ appeared to the disciples 40 days. And then he said, wait for the promise of the Father. That is Pentecost. Pentecost is 50 days. So wait another 10 days in the upper room for the Feast of Weeks. So that's 50 days. Now the Feast of Weeks, it talks about many verses about the time's sake. We're not going to do that. But we have Deuteronomy chapter 16 and verse 10, where it tells us about tribute. Okay? So remember what happened. They have 40 days, and at the 40 days, then they go to Jerusalem. For what? A census. So first they had a census where they had to go back to Bethlehem. All right? Now they're doing another census where they have to go to Jerusalem. Let's look at Deuteronomy 16 and verse 10 real quick. And you shall keep the Feast of Weeks unto the Lord your God with a tribute. Okay? Okay, tribute is a census. It's accounting the people of a free will offering to the Lord according to the Lord as God has blessed you. So there's a census. There's a tribute. Okay, there's accounting that takes place during the Feast of Weeks. So again, Joseph and Mary would have had to at least complete 40 days. Okay, and then we have this mystery of this tribute offering as it relates to the Feast of Weeks. Fascinating. And as we continue, you can see we're calling this New Jerusalem, where Christ is being counted. So then in Luke chapter 2, verse 22, they do this offering. In verse 24, it tells them that they offered, the offering is 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, I believe. Okay, and again, that's completing Leviticus chapter 12, verse 6. But then what happens is we get the 2 witnesses. Okay? So when they go and they do these offerings, yes, they present them to the priest. Okay? But remember, Christ is above the priesthood. The priesthood is all corrupt. Okay? So they're doing some things that the priests do, but then God by his Spirit leads the 2 witnesses. The types of the 2 witnesses, Simeon and Anna. And they are the 2 priests that receive Christ to the throne. They're like the ones receiving of what's happening to the throne. So the 2 witnesses are also bearing witness. And they are expressed by Anna and Simeon. And let's look at what they do. And there was a man in Jerusalem whose name was Simeon. The same man was just and devout, waiting for the consolation of Israel. And the Holy Spirit was upon him, and it was revealed unto him by the Holy Spirit that he should not see death before he had seen the Lord's Christ. And he came, what? By the Spirit. Okay? It's only by the Spirit that 2 people knew when Christ was coming to Jerusalem who he was. And he came into the temple. So it was in the temple where Simeon. Now this relates to God's throne. Okay? And when the parents brought the child Jesus to do for him the custom of the law, we're going to talk about that in a second. That Simeon, what? He took him up in his arms and he blessed him as the priest. Lord, now let your servant depart in peace according to your word. For my eyes have seen your salvation, Yeshua, which you have prepared before the face of all the people to lighten the Gentiles and the glory to the people, Israel. And Joseph and Mary marveled at those things which were spoken of him. And Simeon blessed them and said, Mary, behold, this child is set for the fall and the rising again of many in Israel, for a sign which shall be spoken against. And yea, a sword shall pierce through your own soul also, that the thoughts and intents, that the thoughts of the hearts may be revealed. And then, once he had completed, there was one Anna, a prophetess, the daughter of Phinehas, the tribe of Asher. She was of great age and had lived with a husband 7 years from her virginity. And she was a widow about 84 years, which departed not from the temple, but served God with fastings and prayers. Guys, the 2 witnesses may completely surprise us, okay? They may be like, anyway, this is a type of the two witnesses, all right? And she's coming in the instant, gave thanks likewise to the Lord, and spoke of him all of them, and looked for the redemption of Jerusalem. And when they have performed all the things according to the law of the Lord, they returned unto Galilee. Okay? Now, I want you to notice here, now his parents went to Jerusalem every year for the feast of Passover. This is very important for us to understand, because when we look at Matthew, okay, they're in Passover for, they're in Bethlehem for Passover, okay, and going to Jerusalem, the same thing. But let's look at, and when they have performed all the things according to the law of the Lord. So what does this mean? They performed all according to the law of the Lord. Well, it's this. It's the shekel of the sanctuary. Amazing. So when you're counted in a census, guys, you bring a coin. You bring your half shekel. Now, we actually don't know exactly what they performed. They could have done two different types of offerings here. They could have done this, which is called the half shekel coin, which you can see here. And this is a half shekel coin, and it's also called a bika. Now, if you're familiar with this channel, you know we've talked about this at great length. This is the actual size of what this offering would have been. But there's another one, which is 5 shekels. And so the bika, they would have done either a bika, this one, and or 5 shekels. Now, why would they have done 5 shekels? Because you can see from Leviticus chapter 27, verse 6, you can do a vow. From a month old to 5 years, you can do 5 shekels. But what's interesting, it's 5 shekels for the firstborn of the Levites. And you might say, well, Christ came from the tribe of Judah, so we wouldn't do 5 shekels for this. But this 5 shekels doesn't distinguish if it's for, it just says it's a vow, okay? So what this means is that if they did 5 shekels, if the scriptures don't say specifically, but if they did, 5 shekels is the redemption for the Levites. It can also be the redemption for a child from a month old, because remember, he's already a month old, had to be at least 40 days for them to complete. Okay, so he's at least 40 days old, okay, at least a month old, and they could have done this. They could have done this 5 shekels, and if they did, Christ would have been vowed as a priest. And we know he came through a priesthood of Melchizedek. Isn't that amazing? So they could have done both. They could have done the bika half shekel, and they could have done the 5 shekels. Okay? Now, for more on these ideas and concepts, I do encourage you to watch this video where we talk about the 5 shekels and the redemption of the firstborn. Okay? So let's keep going. So we have a half shekel. Okay, a half shekel is the ransom for the soul, which you see in Exodus 30, verse 13. And then from a month old to 5 years old, there's another one where you would give 5 shekels. Okay? And that's in Leviticus 27. And then there's 5 shekels also relate to the firstborn of the Levites in Numbers chapter 3:47. So they went to Jerusalem every Passover. Very, very important. Now, let's shift gears and now let's look at Matthew. So everything we just saw that took place was in the Gospel of Luke. Now, of course, in Matthew, we get the wise men. The wise men from the east come to Jerusalem. Now, remember that they went to Jerusalem and Bethlehem. Okay, they went to Jerusalem every year, but they stayed in Bethlehem, right? And they went every Passover. So now, this is 2 years later, guys. So 2 years later is Matthew chapter 2, verse 1, the wise men coming from the east. And they saw a star, and it stood over where the child was. And then what happens is, verse 11 says, they came into the house. But remember, when he was born in a manger. So this is not the same thing. Okay? So we saw in Luke chapter 2, he was in a manger when the shepherds found him. Well, when the wise men find him, he's in a house. And we do know he's 2 years old. We'll get into that in a second. But what the wise men do is they fall down and they worshiped him. So now what they begin to do is match the characteristics of the 24 elders. The 24 elders cast their crowns and they bowed before the Lamb, right? And what do they bring? They bring gold, okay? And gold relates to the church at Laodicea. Redeem from me gold tried in the fire. What's the gold? The shekel of the sanctuary, the redemption, the census. Okay? So the wise men are now performing something like the man-child. Okay, so we saw the two witnesses, Anna and Simeon, and now you see the wise men. Okay, so they bring gold and frankincense and myrrh. And this is the oil. Okay, so they bring the gold and they bring the incense, the frankincense. Okay, the frankincense, the myrrh. Now the church at Smyrna means myrrh. Okay, and so you can see that you have the gold of the church at Laodicea, and now you have the myrrh of the church at Smyrna, Revelation 2 and verse 8. Now, here, what happens is they flee to Egypt. So basically what happens is Joseph gets the dream, and in the dream, he's told to flee Herod. So they flee into Egypt. This is like in Revelation 12, where the woman goes into the wilderness 1,260 days. So they fled Egypt. Then in verse 16 it says, Herod slew all the children in Bethlehem from 2 years old. Okay, that's how we know Matthew chapter 2, Christ is 2 years old. Okay, 2 years old and under, according to the time he inquired of the wise men. So he realized from the wise men the age of the child by talking to them. Okay. So that's how we know that Matthew chapter 2 is 2 years later. Okay. Christ is saying in a house. Okay. Where the child was. And they came to the house. Luke 2, they're in a manger. Right. Now, one of the important reasons I'm going through all this detail is this. Okay. We have a census going on. Okay. We have those that are bringing their oil to anoint the king. Okay. We have the gold, the oil. And this shows and proves to us that when the woman births the man-child, it's 2 years later. Okay. Thus showing it's 2 years in which the dragon is cast to the earth in Revelation chapter 12. So if we follow this type in this shadow that we can see here, we now can see the woman births the man-child. We know that was a date, September 22nd, 2017. All right? Then what does it say? Woe to the inhabitants of the earth, for the devil is come down, having great wrath, because he has a short time. Now, what this begins is the 42 months. So the devil is cast down when? 2 years. Just like Herod, Christ was 2 years old. Do you understand that? So now we have proof that after this Revelation 12 sign, September 22nd, 2017, 2 years later, the Antichrist will be revealed. Okay? That's proving the things that we're telling you guys. Okay? So we've been showing you this. We've been showing you this pattern. That's how we know Donald Trump is the Antichrist. Why? You have the woman birthing the man-child right here. Then you have year 1, year 2. Okay? And you can see right here, we got it. The Antichrist his reign of 42 months starts, or he's revealed. So this also proves that precisely this date, okay, September 22nd, 2017, 2 years later, the devil is cast down to you having great wrath. It's 2 years, guys. So Donald Trump is the Antichrist. That's the other thing about all of this that I want you to understand, is that the interpretations I've been giving you are accurate. They are so. Wow. Now, I'm not sure if you just realized what happened, but you just saw the solving of one of the great mysteries in Bible prophecy. In Revelation chapter 12, we see the woman birth the man-child. This, of course, created great enthusiasm when we saw the sign in the heavens in September 2017. Then the prophecy continues with the dragon. You have Michael and his angels fighting at the dragon and his angels. Now, there was lots of different ideas and constellations. People tried to come up with stuff, but none of it actually was the scriptures. But what happens is the woman goes into the wilderness 3.5 years, right? She births a man-child. She goes in the wilderness 3.5 years. What we just learned is we learned about the restrainer. In 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, it says there's a restrainer. There's something that withholds. And there's different debates on what was withholding. Okay, is it the church? Is it this? Now we've learned, we have proof, we have confirmation that it is Michael that was the restrainer. Michael was restraining, okay? He was holding back. Then the war in heaven takes place after what? 2 years. So within the 3.5 years that the woman gives birth to the man-child is when the war in heaven takes place. Michael and his angels fight against the dragon, his angels, and there was no more place found in heaven for them. They are cast to the earth. So now we have proof that that coincides with Christ's first coming in Herod. Herod also goes about to kill all the children 2 years old and under in Bethlehem. Okay? So this proves it, guys. It happened. Okay, it happened. We got proof and confirmations by the scriptures. This is precisely 2 years. Now, in Revelation chapter 17, verse 10, it says 5 are fallen, 1 is. Another is yet to come. That's what? 7. And he must continue a short space. Now we know what that short space is. From the sign of the woman clothed with sun, he must continue a short space. What? Now, from that time, you got 2 years. So then, Donald Trump is inaugurated January 2018, okay? And he continues, and then he's revealed as the Antichrist in August 2019, just as we told you. Okay, he must continue a short space. And then it says, then he becomes the 8th and goes in perdition. So that's happened, guys. That happened. Okay, this is all just proof and confirmation of the stuff we've been telling you. Now, let's just recap of everything that we just saw, we just learned. Besides that part, okay, we just learned another great mystery. The other great mystery is, how does Luke chapter 2 and Matthew chapter 2 coincide? How do we come to terms with them? Now, of course, if you keep, Christmas and you read these stories, none of the ideas of the feasts or any of these things that it says that there's certain things that we went into the details in this video, none of that makes any sense because you're not in the right time of year. You don't really understand these things. When clearly the scriptures is talking about, things that pertain to the law. Okay, but not only that, we can see what Christ is doing when he's born. He's the Son of Man is caught in the heavens and the clouds and brought before the Ancient of Days. Okay, we have the 2 witnesses. We have Anna, we have Simeon, bearing witness to him when he comes to the temple after what? 40 days. It must be 40 days for the purification of Mary, right? So now we know what Leviticus chapter 12, we understand that. Okay, we understand that the shekel of the sanctuary is what they're doing by the custom. And he's the first fruits. He is the firstborn of many brethren. So he is the firstborn, okay? Now what we have again, in the last days, we have another census taking place. What happened? a census was taking place. They must go to the city of David. They must go to Mount Zion. Okay? So when you're doing the census, you don't go back to some place where you were born and the earth. You go back to New Jerusalem and you give account. You say, okay, here I am. Count me for the census. So that's the other aspect of this, is we do have a census. We do have a counting of the people taking place for those whose names are written on the Lamb's Book of Life. Guys, it's a long video. It's a lot of information. Please watch the videos. We have a playlist in the description field of the videos that we talked about, the woman clothed with the sun. And I have to have another part to this because we have Christ's birth. We also has his crucifixion. So his birth and crucifixion is both Passover season. Okay, we also learned through this that these days seem to line up with the feasts that take place in the spring. Passover, the Feast of Weeks, okay? And then also at his crucifixion, we can also see the Revelation chapter 12 sign take place. So guys, this is part of a playlist called The Man-Child, okay? As well, this is part of the playlist on Donald Trump is the Antichrist, okay? And all I can say, guys, is the new message I'm going to conclude with is fear God. Worship him that made the heavens, the earth, the seas, and the fountains of waters. And worship him. Fear God, because Babylon is fallen.